Welcome, everybody. This live stream is brought to you by Planksip, a media outlet and a philosophical publishing company. So I would like to, the topic tonight is actually COVID and climate change correlations. Now, I need to explain in this inaugural episode what the idea of COVID and why I'm intentionally mixing COVID with climate change. As you'll see, and as this series starts to unfold, there's going to be a couple things that might go through your thought process as a potential viewer or as a viewer. The first thing is that I will tend to catastrophize some things. I don't, and I intentionally am not going to have the worst case scenario that I'm painting and the efforts that we need to do in response to what we know to be anthropomorphic climate change. I'm not saying it's going to have some real direct political consequences, which may be abrasive to some, but I want you to keep far-fetched for other people in terms of what they believe and how the futures will actually unfold. One thing is for certain, we can't entirely predict the future, but the reasoning journey is what I would like this series to be about, okay? Now, I'm not isolating this series from the outside public. The reason why I've chosen YouTube as the platform for this live stream and this series is because there is an ability for the viewers to actually engage in the chat. So I do encourage you to do that, is to chat in the appropriate locations. And that's going to be on Facebook or also YouTube, okay? I also have another special request that goes out to anybody that would like to be a part of this conversation. There is a way for you to do that, okay? So if you see here, it says join this conversation and there's a link. Just type it in, come on in, and you'll be in a waiting room, so to speak. I can have a conversation with you off the air, or I might just choose to bring you right in, okay? Regardless, you're going to be on air, you're going to be live streaming on YouTube and on Facebook on the Planksip channels anyway. So for those of you that would like to participate, feel free to use that code. And I'll probably remind people of that throughout the conversation, okay? While we're at it, why don't we throw a couple other things up here, like follow us on Twitter. I mean, do I have to be so obvious in my requests? We all know it helps. Despite whatever the condition of Twitter is and whether it'll be here in the future, I'm not sure. I think, I mean, that's kind of silly. I didn't really mean that. Twitter's obviously going to be here. It's just whether it's actually used in a way that our viewership and our communities actually value, I don't know. These things can change. Okay. So also, the other thing that I want to let people know about is planksip.org. We are offering free membership, which just means that we send you emails every once in a while. But your support is appreciated because you join our email list, you become part of the family, so to speak. And that's just good all around for everybody. We'll continue to create great content, help authors build their platforms, produce media, and just keep fighting the war, okay, on climate. So anyways, that all being said, there is a free membership. There's also a paid membership, but I'm not going to even get into that. It's just not the part of this series. Okay, So, well, let me have a little. Oh, we do have somebody. That was okay. Well, let's just roll with it. We've got Tim that has joined the conversation, and I'll patch Tim in here in a second. Hey, Tim, how are you doing? No, he dropped off. Okay, fair enough. So here's how I'd like to kind of start the conversation. I wanted to elaborate on the title of the event, which is climate or COVID and climate correlations. Okay. Now, when I say correlations, there's a ubiquitous sort of follow-up to that, causation and correlation, we want to be really careful about this linkage. Okay. And this series has nothing to do with any causal linkage between the two. I'll be very direct. It's completely ideological. Okay. Now that should also be some sort of a warning flag when somebody uses the word ideological. And I'm using it in this sort of sense to say that there's nothing that is physically tied to those two concepts. Okay. That I'm willing or even thinking about bringing into the conversation. If you have something that you think is causal in that sort of thing, is it relevant to the conversation? Not really, because think about just the concepts involved. That's all I want you to think about. I want you to think about the austerity, the economic slowdown. This was a worldwide response to a pandemic. Okay. Now, everybody knows that. But at the time when I'm recording this video, which is on this live event, which is on March 10th, Wednesday, March 10th, 2021, we are at a point with the pandemic where we can see light at the end of the tunnel. Why not start bringing in the metaphors? We can see the light at the end of the tunnel, okay? Numbers are climbing rather substantially in some areas, and I really hope that the way this plays out is with the least number of additional deaths moving forward, and that the weird wackiness that was 2021 or 2020 and 2021, the COVID time, is really, really an anomaly in terms of pandemic outbreaks and stuff. This is really what I hope happens, okay? The correlation that I would like to talk about is that the pandemic has forced us into several modes of reductionist, that's maybe not the entirely best word, but it's like a simmering of our activity. I mean, we have cut economic activity, we have cut plane travel, we've cut tourism, we've cut so much that the economic engine that is our world economy has really slowed, okay? I have no idea where this this claim came from, and I'm not saying that this makes the efforts and the work that Planksit does, okay, as a media outlet. I'm just being very direct that I don't know where the following piece of information came from. So if someone can help me out, that would be great, okay? I have no empirical data right now at this point in time as to what the COVID pandemic reduction in CO2 was. I have no idea. I do talk to people frequently that I believe, have this information or have read this information, along with the knowledge of where we're at in terms of what we've reduced. The general consensus from this group is that the reductions required are such a baby step towards the amount of total reductions that we need to do in order to hit our targets of zero carbon. I mean, and that's even something I mean, that's something I would really like to bring up and have as a conversation. Is that, is it even possible to do no carbon? Okay. And I think I don't know if it's a prudent plan, right? And you say, well, where does your practicality come in here? Okay. And I think that policymakers and people that are thinking about climate change really, really have to be realistic. Okay. And the combination of top-down, bottom-up change that was required to get the momentum of this movement moving forward was probably there. Okay. Let me just finish this point, and then it does look like we have somebody that's joined. So this is great. Okay. So the idea is, I cannot imagine that there's any possible way that we can get to a zero carbon. I can't even, I just can't imagine that it's zero. Carbon is so ubiquitous everywhere, okay? And there's a certain amount of infrastructure, there's a certain amount of medical equipment, logistics that are required to keep humanity human, basically. I didn't say alive, but also there's a component to that to say what makes men men and women women and people people, right? So what is that? What is that je ne sais quoi? Well, I am proud to say that I do live on a planet that I think overall we do value human life. Okay, there's a reason why in the history books the atrocities are something that we shun as a society, as a group, world sort of zeitgeist, so to speak. So the idea here is to say, as long as we value human life, and we all agree on that, and we need to get as close as we can to a carbon zero scenario, where do those two worlds meet? There's an optimum line that they meet, and the gradation for that optimal line is not transparent to what an empirical measure can do, right? We can get really close to that, but we don't know if that's like an artificial economic model. We just don't know if that's the way it works, okay? And I believe there was something by Brett Weinstein where he said that anything, that's a wonderful podcast, by the way. Him and his wife, Heather, do an amazing job. The synergy between man and wife, two evolutionary biologists, is just wonderful to witness, as long as you're able to realize that that's something that's impressive. So anyways, I do. And you have this scenario, you have this situation where Brett warns, and again, I'm just out of a recollection, we only write down so much and document it, but the idea was that make as small as possible incremental steps. Moving further away just increases the amount of complexity and the possibility of failure or errors multiplying on errors, this type of thing. And so that I do agree with, and I think, but I continue with these far-fetched ideas. Okay, so with that note, let's see what Bill has to say. Bill, welcome. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well. You got me at a disadvantage. I was having my dinner. So,
like, I can always jump off and then let let a poor man eat his food. I mean, that's something that we need to
consider.
That's allowable.
If we want to keep humans alive, i.e. me.
Yeah, well, I mean, what a timely thing. It's like, yeah, if we want to keep humans alive, do we value human life? Bill, I don't want you to not eat your dinner, right? I mean, that'd be just cruel.
That would just be very cruel. But yeah, that's you bring up some really good points, and I'm just happy sitting back listening, and we'll see how this goes, and maybe later I'll have a little bit to add.
Sure, sounds good. Okay, there is a chat functionality, so you can always say, "No, I disagree. Put me on." I'll try to do that. Thanks, Bill. Okay, so I was essentially going through some of the concepts of the choice for COVID and climate change. Why bring these two thematic elements together in a correlation conversation? Why do that? And the idea is that COVID right now is ubiquitous and everywhere. As I've pointed out, it is a reality for every conscious living human on this planet. And so this is something that will be with us from a historical standpoint. That is undoubtable. It is written into the history books. And so where I'm going with this is that it looks like we're going to come out the other end of this. And it looks like there is going to be a pretty good vaccination rate, and not the choice, because it does feel like there is a deterministic element to the way this is going to, quote unquote, get back to normal. Okay. So the conversation in the culture is that there is somewhere in between going back to completely how things were to almost everybody agrees that we can't entirely go back to the way we were. Right. And so it's like, what does that mean? I mean, so let's talk about it, right? And so that was kind of the idea. It's like, how are things going to change? Okay, and now because I'm doing this as a series, if we move this out 4 months and 16 episodes later, the COVID reality might be quite different. If this goes on for 2 years, for example, maybe the COVID conversation is just a distant memory. Okay. We certainly know that there were COVID babies, so to speak, children born in the last year. I mean, quite obviously. And, they were born in the year of the pandemic, and in 100 years, they'll be asked, hopefully everybody's still around in 100 years, but they'll be asked, so what was it like back? Oh, that's right. You were just born that year. They won't know, right? So there's the extent of the living memory, right? That living memory has then died. So the idea is that the COVID as a cultural influence is indelibly a footprint that is in our existence. It ripped us into a culture. It just cemented us into a cultural narrative of exactly what happened to our generation. And I realize that this is something that is really important, to communicate, especially for people out there that think of culture, if they think about philosophy. Let's do another plug for Planksip here. There it is. Visit planksip.org for a free membership. So it's this kind of thinking that I want to advocate for. Cultural thinking, philosophical thinking. If you can take a subject like this, if you can wrestle with it and you enjoy those kinds of conversations passively or personally, then maybe Planksip's a site for you. I mean, it's easy to Google. Just Google Planksip, and that's us, right? So, anyways, back to the concept of the of COVID. This is something that is directly imprinted upon in our culture. No time in my past did I know of something so economically severe, right? I had grandfathers that now have passed, and they they um, they would have remembered. They would have been exactly that. They would have been too young to remember the Great Depression, and that is something that means that something so economically devastating that affected so many has not hit in 3 generations, and then all of a sudden hit, right? And so this is a big deal. Okay, this defines generations. And as I do, if I'm doing any kind of freestyling thought here, I want to share with you guys something that just just kind of surfaced. Robert Sapolsky, he's an endocrinologist, a rather famous public intellectual, very well respected as far as I can determine. He's one of my favorite authors. I've worked on a series and spent a lot of time in his book, Behave. I really love the proximal distal sort of metaphor that he does with behavior. It's ideal, and I really mean that all the way to a Platonic sense. It's so closely coupled to reality that some of the and I'm going to say for me, because but wholeheartedly I think this is the direction it needs to be understood. This is something that we know, and the role of science is so important. To invoke any kind of non-physical sort of reality is kind of silly, and really outside the scope of what I advocate for. Argue against. It's not that I'm not sympathetic for some of these transcendental theories. I think they're fantastic, but really I am a materialist. Anyway, so back to Robert Sapolsky. The idea with Robert Sapolsky is I read in his book something about the Great Potato Famine, right? And it's just some of the research that he did, and I think there was the potato famine that actually left children in a like an axiomatic state of deficiency of something, because that generation was affected by something like so physical as a famine, right? So that was something that lasted and started to imprint into our biology, which means it's something that is naturally selected for, right? I mean, the environment actually changed that, and if that change as a famine had extended to a point where humanity could have actually formed some sort of a homeostasis in a depressed form of survival, based off of very little food, then we would survive. Chances are we probably just wouldn't survive. The species would die of starvation. But anyways, thinking like this in an evolutionary methodology and thinking, reading on those types of theories are, trust me, they're very sound ways to base an argument. And so, and not so much just an argument. I don't want people listening thinking that the argument is something that's confrontational. The argument can just be the conversations that you're having with yourself in your head. And for all the empiricists that really think of that as an incorrect statement, they'd be right. It is an incorrect statement. We don't actually have but then we're getting into consciousness questions and all that kind of stuff. And the thing is, let's compartmentalize that and talk about consciousness, or I do, in many other venues. Tonight's conversation actually has to do with COVID, the cultural shift, and what that means in terms of our overall and long-term response to the climate crisis, right? This is the idea. And I want to unveil my thinking. Okay, I'm not going to offend Brett Weinstein on this, but I was possibly maybe inspired by Brett Weinstein to come out with a bold, encompassing solution for something that I feel is absolutely necessary. Now, not too long ago, there was Brett's Unity campaign, Brett Weinstein, and his Unity campaign, where he campaigned for something more patriotic for the US government. And this is when it was still, kind of rocky, and people didn't know whether it was going to go Republican or Democrat. We really didn't know until, that election came. So, and I say we, but the whole world was watching. I'm Canadian, but not, all the Americans were watching, and the world was watching. Everybody, like, this really does affect, this does affect, culture as well, and will for decades. And there are governments and regimes that can dramatically affect a cultural imprint. And so this is something that we need to, I think, seriously think about and realize that, in my opinion, so this is the thing, to try and get everybody to realize my opinion. The point is there's a lot of people that I think, if this was crystallized just a little bit more, they'd realize the significance of this, okay? We have to understand how serious the climate change crisis is, okay? And if we, for a moment, think that it's not about the rates of increase, we know definitively what the targets are, what the amount of carbon in our atmosphere is currently, and I think it was 600 plus parts per million. Yes, I think it's 600 parts per million. Okay. And it has doubled that since, I think it was when CO2 in the atmosphere was first measured out of Hawaii, right? So we've had this long sort of modern empirical study. This has been, in terms of dedication, as significant as the space program, everybody, right? This has been going on for a very long time, documenting the changes in the climate. So it's not like we don't have enough data. We really know what's going on, and the carbon is building in our atmosphere to a point where it's killing millions of species. And we are one of those species that depend on those species to some point. Now, the magical thing that technology has done, and I say magical facetiously, because it's almost like a magic wand of destruction, right? It really is horrific if you think of it from some standpoint. All the benefits that it's given humanity, we're now in a position where it's absolutely robbing us of our planet and our home. So everybody take a moment to realize that, oh shit, we've got 8.9 billion people on the planet. And as far as I can determine, and I'm pretty proud to say as a world citizen, that we value human life. Oh, history remembers it as such. Now, are there situations like Khmer Rouge or other atrocities other than the one that comes to my mind and probably everybody's mind, which is the Holocaust out of Germany? There's been a lot of other atrocities, and can we say for certain that we value human life in that light? Well, all I'm going to say is that that's not the argument that I want to get into. It's not even the point that I'm trying to make. The point is moot. It doesn't, I mean, it matters to everybody that was involved with it, but the analogy that I'm trying to make, and everybody has to understand this subtle difference. The analogy that I'm trying to make, that I think that humanity in general values human life. Okay? And what we could do is start to take a sample size of the American political system. Why? Because I like to pick on them? No. The idea here is that everybody knows the political system and they were so fresh in our mind. But there's a real polarizing difference between a Democrat and a Republican. Okay? So basically what I'm trying to say is that the Democrats are typically going to be, I mean, they're the liberal party. And so they are going to try and move the ethical agenda towards human rights, and they're also going to try and move it towards policy and affecting change through regulations and such. Okay, just we'll leave it at that for the purpose of the conversation. These are the kind of the two teams that I'm trying to set up. On the other side, we've got the conservatives that are saying, no, we just want to keep the status quo. Just keep it the way it is. All right. The reason why I'm saying that there's basically only this sort of spectrum is because even if you go to the far left or the far right, there's nobody raising their hands saying, I don't value human life, let's just snuff out a bunch of people. There's nobody saying that, right? It's not even in our culture to say that. So that's how I defend that claim. And we don't need to argue about whether that's true or this. That's how I'm setting it up for the point of that conversation, is to say there is no individual person that is saying that. And if they are an individual person that is saying that we need to just eradicate people, it doesn't seem to be that we are making policies to actually make that happen. Okay. Now, separately, I am willing to have that conversation that there are governments doing that, realizing that there are entire populations that other populations realize that are disposable, and it's not about them, and it becomes a free-for-all on survival. Okay. Academia. What does academia think when we think about this? What do the scientists think? Now, invariably, I'm a little bit torn whether science is. I say a chat from Bill, but I'll get to that in a second. So I see this unique difference between the two political spectrums, but I see a lot of similarities. I see a humane direction from humanity. Now, if there are governments around the world who absolutely know that there's going to be horrific suffering and death coming down the pipeline, and it's a mad dash for being a part of the new sort of order, so to speak, what does this resemble? This resembles people being to the front of the line for a vaccine. And so the other piece of evidence that I want to bring in, just correlative, just circumstantial evidence, it's just a conversation, bring in, is that we, at least in Canada, and I think in a lot of places around the world, are making sure that the most vulnerable people in our society are the first to get it. Okay. So I want to bring up the analogy of the Titanic, but let's first, and hopefully, Bill, that's your entry point into here. Remind me to say about the Titanic if I get kind of distracted here, okay? So what Bill says is, what do you think about the logical outcome of the effects of COVID on our environment? Or what do you think is the logical outcome of the effects of COVID on the environment? Does that account for the impact on the developing world where democracy is superficial at best? Okay, so let's unpack what Bill is saying here. So Yeah, the logical, so the inevitable outcome of effects on COVID are on our environment. What do you think is a lot? Bill, that's a real hard one to, and I think maybe one of the parts of this series is that um, we realize that maybe how we actually um, think about these issues will define the direction that we go. Um, okay, I mean, so if we're focusing on a humanitarian sort of ideal, then policies might be shaped in that direction, so to speak. Okay, but very vague in terms of what are the impacts. I don't know. I have a lot to be kind of just shake my head at as a realistic human being and climate change advocate. I mean, they're the same thing as far as I'm concerned. I take that position, and I'm going to say I'm surprised. I'm really surprised that the cruise ship industry is ready to turn on again. I'm really surprised that people just can't wait to get back to traveling, right? I mean, look, I'm in the same situation. I'd love to go and do a few things. I'd love to be able to experience the world, right? But I want for a minute. Well, let me before I get to that, I keep with Bill's question here. Does that account for the impact the developing world? Oh, I see. Okay. Okay. So Bill's bringing in, a nice little dichotomy there between, a nice little piece there about the differences between less than ideal democracies, I guess. Okay. I mean, and then it's, what does that mean for these? I think that's a real sore point. Bill, honestly, the thing that kind of comes to my mind is that in the world negotiation, where we're maybe, he's going to clarify, but let me kind of go into this. I think it's still a valid point based on the information that I'm reading. But if you have countries that are a little bit more oligarchy-ish, right? I mean, can you imagine that there's some countries that will just literally try and gather for the royal family sort of thing? And I'm not picking the royalty families out. There's there's Putin. There's has a very unique communist model of pretty much tyranny, I guess. So I know it's not technically labeled a tyranny, but it's oligarchy. But he seems really like the supreme commander of that, for a long, long time. So there's a lot of control there, and I think if it comes to us versus them in his own country, we know exactly what's going to be set up behind the scenes. So yeah, I think then there's even more real suffering. Bill, this is really important. If you are taking notes, which you probably are not, but if you have a pen handy and you want to write something down, or a note to go and look up, there was a fascinating speaker by the name of Daniel something or other. I can't remember it. It's a long name. And he was on a recent podcast with Sam Harris. Okay. That should be easy enough to find. Sam Harris, just look him up. He's got all his podcasts. The one with Daniel something or other in his last name. Now, he said it's really funny. You can listen to an hour and a half, 2-hour podcast, and it's like I pick up two things that one thing that will imprint in my memory, like ongoing, right? All of this media that we listen to, all of these concepts that we don't. Oh, okay. No, guys, I have to just tell you, I just saw a comment from Jason McGann. Don't pull your hair out over it. So Jason is somebody I know from, he's a buddy and a longtime friend. Thanks, Jason, for that. That's good, and it's good to see you even just in typing form. And I definitely will try and keep as much hair on my head as possible. But I enjoy thinking about these things, and I think this is part of the job, part of the commitment, part of the passion that we want to do to get the word out. So, anyways, what I would say, you guys, is that have a listen to that particular podcast with Sam Harris and Daniel. Daniel has given an interesting dichotomy that's based off of a lot of research, a lot of historical research about why regimes fail. It's like, oh, I get this upset feeling in my stomach. What fail? What does that mean? What does that mean that our way of life would crash and crumble? Okay, it's happened in history. Chances are it's going to happen again. Well, let's get back from that a little bit, okay? Because here's the thing. I'm willing to stay back from that scenario on an outright collapse. I am. You know why? Because we have choices right now. And so how do choices get into the collected consciousness? Well, they start with one and it propagates. So let me share with you the idea, okay? Someone's really asking me a question and I just can't get to it, Bill. I'm not sure if that's his last name. Markovitz, I'm not sure. It was literally within the last month. And he is also somebody that is a part of the Consilience Project, which is a fascinating, a fascinating project, okay? Now, Bill, in your response, you said, I can clarify. And did that mean, oh, you're back here. Okay, you're on. So, Bill, you just give me the thumbs up or the A-OK in the chat, and I'll pull you in. If not, I'll just keep going. Okay. Okay. Thumbs up it is.
Yeah, so
welcome, Bill, for the second time.
It was
so.
It's interesting because you can only see so much of your text, so I wasn't sure about how the grammar came out or what my thoughts came across clearly. But my question was, what do you think is the logical outcome of the effects of COVID on the environment, and then to what degree does oligarchies or tyrannic governments take effect in that? Because we can, like you were talking about the US elections, and we in these countries can vote and we have some degree of confidence that our votes are cast properly, and we have we elect our leaders. But in some other countries, like you mentioned, Russia or China, or I mean even in India, their influence, right, impacts our environment. Their economic policies will impact our environment. So even if the Western world could get together and they could say, okay, we're going to set these goals and even go towards achieving them, move towards achieving them, that doesn't mean that the rest of the world is going to be there. And so really, I guess I'm saying, following on your original thought, where do you think that the COVID's going to take us? And then what do you think the impacts of the third world is going to be on that logic?
Yeah. Okay, I'm going to jump around in the response, because before you jumped on, and it was part of your chat, you were talking about, was it this particular Daniel on that Sam Harris contest or Sam Harris podcast? And I don't know what it was, but I wanted to say to everybody what the dichotomy was. I just left everybody hanging, and then I'll bring it back and we'll have a conversation about that point as well. But the dichotomy was really that there's a collapse situation with civilizations, and in the event of a collapse, as far as he can determine, there's two types of societies that emerge or that are a part of the collapse. Okay, these are two dominating and distinct characteristics. And this has to do with the populations. So Bill, this means you, this is what it means to be a citizen in these types of, historically, okay? And he says that there was either an oppressed class, oppressed, right? Or there was a chaotic class, right? It's either your society is chaos, right? Or you have an oppressed class. That's the only way through the bottleneck. There is no other way through the bottleneck, right? Now, we're not going to, now I'm going to leave that at that, because the question that you're asking is saying, well, wait a minute, I'm not going to that, that negative outcome yet. We're just saying, if we're going to form policies as a government, if as a world collective we're going to move in this particular direction, what's going to happen with the groups that don't come to the table, right? That's kind of the question. And that's a very, very valid question. And I think that the leaders in our world are doing as good a job as they can possibly. Okay, this is something real big assumption, right? Are there other things that need to be done in conjunction with, what our world leaders are doing? Absolutely. I think there has to be something fundamentally cultural that grabs onto this with a much stronger grasp than it's grabbing now. And I want to explain what that actually is culturally. So we are now, I believe both of you and you're a little bit older than me, but the idea here is that I remember recycle bins. I remember learning about the environment. My mother remembers about learning about the environment when she was a little girl. This isn't something that's new. We've implemented things into culture so that it's normal that we put things in recycle bins, and we do certain things, right? That's now been adopted as a norm, right? This is what we do. What we've quickly realized is that we, as citizens, we should realize that we were kind of duped here, right? We do all of these things, right? But it's still a runaway freight train, right? We're being buried alive, and yet we're trying to figure out whether the pile of dirt should go there or it should go there, right? So essentially, I'm saying the problem is much bigger than it tends to present itself with, at least in terms of asking an average person, right? So if it's as big as I'm going to say it is that big. Does it have relevance whether there's governments that don't pull their own weight? Well, I am saying that the between the IPCC and the various different government commitments, man, we're going towards that. These are all the government, all the leaders of the government in the world are all trying to get together to do this type of thing. This is the equivalent of Warsaw for that particular period of time, right? They're like, where else are we coming together for some sort of a world conversation? Well, on pandemics, I believe there's an open world conversation. And in general, I think more of the scientific community is opening up to symposiums and open thought sort of things around the world. But, generally speaking, this is a huge effort, right? The world is working on this. The problem that we're finding is that there's a lot of people that are reluctant to it, and those people are electing people into positions that don't quite know how dramatic it is. So there's this huge lag of understanding, and it's not days. Now, look, I want to give you a real good example of this, and it's a COVID example. Okay, I got to reframe it a little bit because it's it's a story, or it's a sequence that happened to someone I know. So, anyways, you have. If somebody gets the notice and the moment it came into your consciousness last year about COVID, what happened? You're like, oh, that's interesting. And then did you dismiss it? Did you think, oh, it's probably just the flu, or it's this, or it's just like the Norwalk or something like that, right? Even to the general public, that's probably or could have been what people thought. Very quickly, we found out, decisively so, that the science told us that this was not the case. Okay, now there's percentage of the population that are like completely distrustful of the scientists. That's scary to me, right? It's like, if I'm following somebody in a threatful situation, I want to follow the scientist here, because you're just standing there doing nothing, right? I mean, so in many respects, follow the science, right? And I think you agree with that. So, anyways, what we have is this situation. Yeah, we're back to our 10 minutes, so we got to do some wrapping up. Okay, thanks for that note. Okay, so we're back to this situation about thank you, Bill. The Titanic. Okay. All right, guys, this is going to be the kind of conversation that I hope to stimulate every Wednesday, same time, same place. I might bring in some other supporting materials. I hope that other people can join. But anyways, this is the start. This was episode 1. Now, the story about the Titanic. Okay, so we were talking about world population, or I was, but I'm really including everybody. Okay, so we're talking about the world population and about how we value human lives. Okay, and so you have a COVID reality where we valued elderly and the most susceptible. Okay, right, the most at risk. Okay, so we valued human life in that particular manner. Now, I do know that there was things that happened that don't really paint to that story, but overall, I think that's the way it is. Okay, that's how the healthcare rollout works, and this is how this kind of mechanism is working, more or less. The Titanic situation is a nice heuristic to think about. How did we value human life when that ship was going down? Okay, and there is a cultural acceptance that as that ship goes down, well, who do we put in the lifeboats? Right? We put women and children into the lifeboats. Right? That's what we did. Typically, what happened when there was a war? Well, the men would go to war, and they'd be the first between a man and a woman to go onto the battlefield to lay their lives on the line, because we as a society valued that female and child life over the male life, generally speaking, right? And so what I'm pointing out is that there's a difference between how we've valued human life, and that's something, in terms of counterfactual thinking, something to consider when you start to understand things that affect people's lives, right? And this can be drawn out on a big sort of landscape, where we're talking about the decisions that some of these governments will make can and will affect their human populations, or affect populations dramatically. Not just humans, I mean biodiversity, I mean everything, and realizing that the whole world is a living organ, so to speak. We have to, actually, I do want to say, it's like a living lung, right? I mean, there was that experiment where somebody calculated that the thickness of the of carbon, if it was laid in a slurry of water, would be, I think, 1 millimeter tall, I guess, all if you wrapped it all the way around and so what happens is there's this breathing, this natural breathing of the earth, because the natural living, and then fall seasons, like the spring and the fall, the leaves come into spring, and that's where it peaks in terms of sucking CO2, and then when the leaves fall off the trees, it reduces a little bit, right? Or it off gases a bit, right? And so then you actually have a bit of a rise. So the best months are in the spring, and the worst months are in October. It's like a living lung for the planet, right? And so we're putting like more and more smoke into this lung. We're just choking ourselves. And what did we say to our parents? We said, you shouldn't be smoking, right? And then what happened? Well, I mean, this is the thing. We know that it's not good for us, and why do we do it? Is it an addiction? Yeah, it's an addiction. We're addicted to consumerism. And I think people need to really start thinking about it. Governments need to really start thinking about it. That's what this series is about, and it's about trying to get real, and it's trying to say, what are those changes? Anybody that wants to return to this type of event, you're going to see that I will talk about a military grade intervention. This is scary, but it doesn't have to be. It is going to be a worldwide war on climate. It has to be a sequester. It has to be where our limits of carbon are so carefully allocated to make sure that we value human life the way we want to continue valuing human life. That's my point, and that's a good strategy to build things on, and that's where we're going to flush out on this series. And so, yeah, I want to thank everybody for coming by, and this has been a real pleasure, and I really hope that you guys can be a part of it. So here we go. Follow us on Twitter. Free memberships. Remember, they're always a good thing. Go to planksip.org, get a free membership. Get a paid membership. I don't even need to sell you. Just buy it. Then I'll contact you and I'll tell you what you got to do for that. Okay. Now, that's about it, guys. I want to thank you for that, and I'll just stick around here and silently sip on some water in case there's any comments that come in. Probably not. It's the first one, and I don't know how many people showed up.
Sorry, Daniel, I got another call in about 3 minutes, so I'm going to knock off. But congratulations on your inaugural podcast here, and good luck. We'll see you in the future.
Thanks, Bill. I wonder if I can. I think that's good. I mean, it just came to such a natural, good conclusion. I think we're good. Adios till next week.